There's lots of different ways in which you can kind of think about what you want a control response to be like if it's not like a step response, right? Like if it's not just following set point exactly, what are the important things? And unfortunately, there are a number of different important things. So you have all of the ways that you describe a second order response, typically to describe a control response. So you have something like, how long does it take, if I have a set point disturbance, how long does it take until it first touches the set point? Even if it maybe goes beyond the set point after that. You have something like, how much is this overshoot, right? You have something like, okay, you can go as fast as you want, but at least like when stuff has settled down, how long does it take you to go to be within some limit from the set point indefinitely? That's called the settling time. Okay, so these things you will remember hopefully from your CPN, right? So the rise time, the overshoot, the settling time, the settling ratio, all of those things are ways in which we describe second order responses, but it's also in general ways in which people describe control responses in general. And when we describe ideal responses, right, you can imagine that we want that to be as small as possible, that to be as small as possible, this to be as small as possible. Okay, so that's the direction of looking like a step response, right? So we want to get to target as quickly as possible. We want to overshoot as little as possible. And once all the transient stuff is done, we want to get to within the kind of some band of the set point as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, even when you saw second order responses, these things are typically impossible to do simultaneously. And so what usually happens is, if I want to increase my rise or decrease my rise time, so if I want to go from that place to that place, I can do that, but then I'll have a bigger overshoot. Okay, that's just usually how these things work. And so we don't typically specify responses when we design the ideal controller, because the ideal controller, we imagine, just moves smoothly and quickly from the current position to the new set point position. And so almost always, we specify what we have in mind when we specify a controller is like the lowest order step response that we can manage. Okay, so and just to clarify what that means is, if this is YSP, right, as I've mentioned, like perfect control is like this. Maybe we're okay. I don't know, like the colors again, I'm just going to dash. If we have that beautiful first order response, right, with tau c, again, making tau c smaller gives better control. We get there quicker, right? But we have no overshoot, and we just move, we start moving immediately, and then we move directly to set point, and we kind of stop when we get there, right? Everything else is kind of a negotiation back from that. So if we settle for kind of a higher order response, we are first of all settling, just because we can't get away without a lower order response, right? Because what a high order response means is that it's laggy, right? Like it doesn't start moving immediately. It'll start moving eventually. Now, obviously, when you're talking about a controlled response, that is undesirable just on the face of it, right? Like if you say, this is exactly what happens when you have somebody who's tardy to respond. Like you say, hey, okay, cool, we've got to get to the place. And you don't hear from them at all. They're just like sitting, playing their game, right? Like, and maybe mentally they're like achieving some internal state of readiness, right? And you're like, hey, are you coming? And it's like, what? Like, I'm doing it, man. I'm getting there in my head. You just can't see any movement. That's super frustrating. And it's frustrating as somebody watching a control system as well, right? Like you did the thing, but it's not doing its thing. So you're tempted to maybe shout a little harder or like, move the set point a little higher. That's how bad control happens, right? So we want this direction. This is like the good direction for control. Everything else is compromise. So we never want overshoot. It's not like we're like, oh, you know what I really like in a control response? Like I really like about a 20% overshoot. But you'll see in next week's reading, there are design strategies that specifically target overshoot. Why? Because in practice, they've determined that it's a good compromise. That if we tune for this perfect response, we actually end up getting to the target slower than if we have a slightly oscillatory response in the response. But those tuning methods kind of are, let's say, the pragmatic tuning methods. You'll see that when we talk about online tuning and all of the techniques that we're reading about next week. Oh, just a very important heads up. I made a mistake in the reading sections. You'll see 1.2 is repeated. Tomorrow, Monday's reading is actually 1.3. Right? Sorry, 11.3. Yes, 11.3. I will be updating. I saw it when I was setting up the quizzes for next week. So we choose these things, again, not because we have particular desires necessarily, although sometimes we may have conditions where, let's say you're trying to pasteurize milk, right? If you're pasteurizing milk, there's a very, very narrow band of temperatures where if you go over that temperature, you've got to be in that temperature range for a while, but you can't go over or you'll cook the milk. Okay, a classic version of this is that they also pasteurize eggs. And you can know, like, if you heat the egg a little bit too much, it won't look like a raw egg anymore. And so there, you want to absolutely not have overshoot. And you're okay if it takes a little bit longer to get there, as long as you don't have overshoot. Overshoot is the worst, right? But here's a place where overshoot is amazing. Missile design. Because if you've done your job right, it doesn't overshoot. It just gets to the target as quickly as possible and explodes. And so it doesn't matter, and this is, by the way, why movies can make a big deal of those satellites really overshooting quite a lot, because they are tuned under the assumption that the most important thing is to get to the target as quickly as possible. And so you'll usually see, if a missile overshoots a plane, it overshoots it by a lot. And it then kind of has to kind of completely turn around, but then it's like, this time it's going to happen, and then it's going to get there. So what I'm trying to tell you is those are two realistic scenarios where you've got completely opposite needs, right? In the one, you want to go really, really slow because eggs and milk and all of those kind of products are super temperature sensitive, so you've got to go really slow. You may also even have manipulated variable constraints where you just don't open up the gas 100% and have local boiling. But you go even a little bit more smooth so that you don't heat the local water or eggs or milk too much. In the missiles, it's I've got these thrusters, I've got to burn them as much as I can. Just max out, go as fast as I can, get to the target as quickly as I can. So the condition informs your control requirements.